Jump Force has been described as a lot of different things, some of it being positive, some of it being very negative. There's a lot you can choose to attack Jump Force for. I think it's silly to attack it for its roster or the rematch button, so I won't be talking about those in this video, because those situations are far more complicated than people give them credit for, though I have thought about dedicating an entire video to the rematch option, so maybe I'll do that in the future. But in this video, I would like to speak about the general concept of Jump Force being a quote-unquote mess, which is the most accurate criticism you can levy towards the game, I think. From a pure production standpoint, Jump Force clearly had a lot of behind-the-scenes issues. Here are some examples. Kain and Galena were both announced as playable characters, but they aren't playable at all. There is some data mining that suggests that the two characters are still being worked on, so they're probably going to be playable in the future, but that does speak to my point. The characters were announced as playable characters, and I think those announcements were very clearly intended for the base game because the Kain tweets have been deleted. I'm not sure if the Galena tweets have or not, because I believe they weren't actually posted by Bandai. I think it was posted by PS360, but regardless, Kain was definitely announced as a playable character from official Bandai sources. Then you've got the story mode. Story mode is filled with inconsistent cutscenes. Some of them are like Pokemon games where there's no voice lines or anything like that. You just press X to skip through all of the text. Then there are fully animated CGI cinematics that are actually really good, and then something in between. I feel like Spike wanted to have a really long story mode, but just didn't have the time to flesh out that experience of said story mode. Speaking of story mode, it actually does a pretty good job of explaining why and how all these characters came together. It explains the CAC, and this is less important, but it speaks to my point. You've got items, J skills, and support skills. In a better game, in a game that isn't Jump Force, you would be required to use these to bridge some type of difficulty gap. Well, maybe not necessarily required to use them, but they should at least be helpful. I've played through the story of Jump Force 3 times now, and not once have I used any of those previously mentioned features. They're just not useful, because outside of big boss battles or fights where you're underleveled, the game is super easy, especially if you understand anything about the combo system or anything like that. Then it becomes like super autopilot. It's impossible to lose. Again, I don't think that's super important, but it's another aspect of the story mode that feels incomplete to me. It feels like they wanted to almost build this game as an RPG, at least as far as the story mode is concerned, but they just didn't have the time to really flesh that out, or at least the resources to flesh that out. Even the post-release content has been all over the place. I appreciate the roadmap that they released shortly after release that gave us an idea of when we can expect certain pieces of content to come to the game, but it appears that this is only useful to determine what content we're going to get rather than when we're going to receive it, due to it being July and we haven't gotten any of this. Then there's the whole Bakugo release date. If you weren't paying attention, earlier this week, Bakugo was announced as a separate character who was going to be released on the 12th. It's the 16th at the time of me recording this video, or it will be the 15th in America. There's no Bakugo in the game. Also, that release date was pulled from every official Bandai source, and now it just says this summer. So is it going back to August? I don't know. There's no official word on this at all. So overall, the mess of Jump Force, based on what I can tell from all of these issues, is a failure to live up to initial plans. What I mean by that is that at some point in production, they decided we can do this thing, whatever this thing is. It depends on the particular example, but we'll just say X, right? This thing. We can do this thing in this amount of time. Then something happened to make that initial estimate incorrect. So they thought they were going to be able to do a super long story mode with fleshed out RPG mechanics, and then something happened that took away development time from that thing, so story mode ended up as what it was. And personally, I think that thing, in this case, was One Punch Man, a hero nobody knows. I think it had a lot of impact on Jump Force's messy development cycle. Obviously, I have no proof of that, but Spike Chunsoft is not a huge company. It's impossible for me to say how many people are working on Jump Force, because you can look at the employees that are hired by Spike Chunsoft, but even that doesn't give you the full story, because that's counting marketing people and etc. It's also not counting contractors, people who are hired to do certain things for the game. So for example, what happens in the games industry a lot is people will just be hired to do a certain piece of artwork, but they won't necessarily be an employee. There'll be a contractor specifically hired, well, not hired, but commissioned to do a specific thing. It's also impossible for me to say how many people who were previously working on Jump Force are now working on a hero nobody knows. But there has to be some level of overlap, right? Spike Chunsoft's issue isn't laziness or incompetence. They're just spread far too thin to be able to deliver the products that we expect from them. They work on a lot of games for such a small team. I disagree with a lot of decisions that the lead developers at Spike Chunsoft appear to make, like pretty core gameplay things that I think I could sit there and argue with the lead developer about for a very long time, and maybe I wouldn't change his mind on anything. But I say that to illustrate that I don't agree with developer decisions made in this game, but to say that the messy development of this game is due to decisions, choices of being lazy, is just disingenuous. I don't know enough about the inner workings of Bandai Namco or Spike Chunsoft to say whose fault any of these given problems are, but in the future, when we want to complain about something like this, try to be as accurate as you can with your complaint. Instead of calling Spike lazy, which as far as I can tell is literally just not true, complain about Spike being understaffed, complain about Spike having too much to balance at the same time. I mean, regardless of whatever way you look at it, maybe it didn't directly impact Jump Force, although I think it did. A Hero Nobody Knows had a trademark registered, or at least One Punch Man had a trademark registered for a console game back before the release of Jump Force, which means it was, at least in conceptual stages, I believe it was probably being worked on for some time, meaning that at some point they were working on two games at once, and it's hard to say whether there were developers on both teams, trying to get both games done. But regardless, there's clearly a production problem at Spike Chunsoft, but the last thing I would do is say that the team is lazy, or to say that the team is bad, or to say the team is incompetent, because there's nothing to suggest that. There's a difference between being lazy and being understaffed, or being underfunded, or whatever. But until the production problem gets fixed at Spike Chunsoft, or until Bandai spreads out their given developers with different projects, I think it's important to manage your expectations as opposed to getting upset when they don't deliver on your expectations. After all, this isn't a new problem. J-Stars had similar problems, Burning Blood had similar problems, and it will continue to be a problem until there's some dramatic change either in this industry or in this company or in this publisher. Personally, if I could just pick a thing to happen, I would pick that Bandai just spreads out the developers, so instead of relying on Spike Chunsoft for A Hero Nobody Knows and Jump Force, and maybe even the next One Piece Arena Fighter, maybe take that One Piece Arena Fighter and go over to Arc System Works and say, hey, could you make a One Piece 2D fighting game? Or take One Punch Man, A Hero Nobody Knows, and go over to Biking Studios, the people who made One's Justice, and say, hey, can you make a One Punch Man game? Go over to another developer instead of just throwing all of your projects at the developers you have available to you. But even something like that, which I think is a pretty reasonable take on the situation, I wouldn't even be comfortable saying that and complaining about that particular problem, because I don't know what the behind the scenes situation is. Maybe they go to developers like this and they request too much money. I don't know. I don't know. There's too much behind the scenes stuff that could be going on, so I'm never going to pretend to you that I know the ins and outs of things that I couldn't possibly know. But with my expectations correctly managed, personally, I'm excited about One Punch Man Hero Nobody Knows, and I'm excited about the future of Jump Force. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, or if you somehow found it informative or something, I'd appreciate you leaving a like on the video. I have a little announcement. Next week on the 22nd at 3 p.m. EST, I will be releasing a pretty exciting video. The video is all but complete. It just needs to be rendered. Literally my favorite video I've ever made. I think it's really cool. So I hope you're looking forward to it. My name is Bilbzy, and I'll see you in the next video.